everyone, and welcome to the Ion Canon podcast, your home for in-depth discussion on lore, the narrative, and the big ideas of the galaxy far, far away. My name is Joel, and I'm coming to you live from Star Wars Underworld, Orange County. Joining me from across the continent in frigid Underworld North, it's the same spot but a different person. It's the host of the flagship SW podcast, Mr. Dominic Jones. Hey, Dominic,
Hey,
how you doing?
hey, Joel, it's good to be here. It's good to be reporting live from the Rebel base on Hoth,
Yeah.
which is our current situation here in Toronto. I did sort of feel like when I left this morning for work, I wanted to just go around shouting, "Your tauntaun will freeze before it reaches the first marker," in the hopes that somebody would reply back, "Then I'll see you in hell." Yeah.
Then you get attacked by a wampa.
Yeah. Strangely, nobody did. Strangely, everybody just like, "Why is that man yelling?" Why is he?
Crazy kids. Yeah, no. Crazy. So, what are we chatting about this week? Well, when George Lucas had the final say on the story of Star Wars, it was often straightforward enough for us to understand the broad strokes of what he intended the meaning of each film to be. Of course, Star Wars, and pop art in general, is most successful when its themes are strongly and convincingly expressed through plot and character. However, even George wasn't always consistent, especially in the many interviews and commentaries he has given over the years to illuminate his films. That inconsistency has gotten more complicated now that multiple directors, showrunners, screenwriters, and other creatives are involved in passing on their characters and stories to the next creative, such as the hands off in the sequel trilogy from JJ Abrams to Rian Johnson and then back to JJ again. So, how do we untangle this? How do we, the audience, interpret artistic intent in this exciting but sometimes bewildering age of creative diversity in Star Wars? Yes, I'm excited to talk about this and more. But first, let's get the plugs out of the way. Let's get the banners up. See what happens when I have to do the thing. All right. So, of course, you can follow us on the Blue Sky at Ion Cannon Blue Sky. .bisky.social on Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever, Facebook, all those great places. And of course, you can follow the SW at the SW, Twitter, Facebook, Blue Sky, all those great places. And of course, the Discord, where this Friday we will be continuing our Mandoverse rewatch with episodes, I believe, 5 and 6 of The Mandalorian. So we're trying to do two a day, two a night. So that'll be fun. I did actually a private Mandoverse rewatch with my dad for the last few weeks. Actually, not weeks, more like months, and it's been a lot of fun. I'll
Mhm.
tell you that.
I've
Especially,
I've been I've been doing my own as well, and we just got to literally those episodes that you're going to be watching in the Discord of 5 and 6. It's a lot of fun, and it's crazy to look back on season one, and I think sometimes we forget how good these shows are when we aren't watching them sort of regularly, when they aren't present in our lives like that. And
mhm.
I've been really enjoying season one, and it shouldn't be because I've seen it multiple times before, but I'm always surprised by how much I enjoy it, how good it is, where like even the quote unquote worst episode of season one, which just watched the other day, which at least in my opinion is the Toro Calican episode. Still had a great time watching. I still thought it was a really good episode, really interesting ideas and interesting characters, and so I really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to carrying forward with this Mandoverse rewatch and being ready for May 22nd.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a weird experience with, oddly enough, Book of Boba Fett, where I
Mm.
really enjoyed that on a rewatch with my dad, even more so than the first time I watched it. And I'll say this: if when you get to Book of Boba Fett, try to watch 2 episodes a night and then the finale.
Mm.
I don't know why, but we did that by just happenstance. We didn't like plan it. That's just how it just turned out. I don't know why, but that like really was a good. It really helped the pacing of that show when we just did
I
two
can
episodes a night.
I can see why that would work. I can see why that would work thinking about the show. And I think that, maybe gives some context to why we've started seeing them with Andor and then with Maul coming up. They're doing these multiple episodes at once release. I think having more time with the characters sometimes, I think, enhances the experience. And with Book of Boba, yeah, those first 2 episodes are kind of one story. The third and fourth episodes are kind of the one story. Then you have 6 and 7, which is the Din Djarin story, and then you come back to Boba Fett for episode 7. I think that actually is a really smart way of doing it.
Yeah, so give that a try. So yeah, but we'll join us on the Discord. That'll be fun. No tractor beam this week, but Chris, aka Star Raptor, and I will actually be having a special bonus episode this Wednesday live reviewing doing a spoiler review of Mike Chen's Outlaw Low Red Moon.
Ooh.
So be on the lookout for that as well. So we're gonna
Ma-
skip.
Matthew and I will be at a basketball game.
Oh, nice.
If you're wondering why that slot was free.
Oh, okay. Well, that I actually did wonder why. I thought it was just because comics are just in this weird spot, so it's like, oh, well, okay, so that helps. So yeah, we're gonna skip week of Star Wars and the Mall trailer, especially because next week's topic will be way more better for us to talk about Mall trailer. And I know I'm also doing this because Dominic had wanted to keep our time to a little bit more sharper, so I'm going to respect that, and we're just gonna get into it. Artistic intent. Hooray, let's do this. So, as I said up top, once upon a time, there was only one artist that kind of only mattered and their intent mattered. And that was George Lucas. A Mr. George Lucas. What he said, goad. You had the EU on this side, but, that was kind of its own thing. But then George decided to hang his hat, go off, hang out with his lovely wife, make those independent movies he said he's going to make, and build a big museum. So this gets into an interesting question of Star Wars as a multimedia franchise of other movies, books, comics, video games, and expanding upon things, beyond those original 6 films, and I guess even to some extent the Clone Wars. Um, I'll just say for myself before we begin, I've always been kind of a weird mix of depth of the author, but also you kind of should know what the artist is to some
Mm,
extent, especially if you're going to do like be intellectually honest with yourself. Because obviously, when you watch a movie, you have your own experiences, your own takes on a film before you like dive in and listen to interviews and stuff about what this means, what that did, etc., right? And then you listen to the interviews, and then you're like, oh, okay. You're like, oh, I had a completely different read on this, right? And I'm someone who believes no read is invalid for the most part. I mean, it's like someone comes out of Star Wars: New Hope, goes, "Damn rebel terrorists, the Empire had it right." And you're like, okay, but there's that. But as other artists have continued to expand upon Lucas's work, things have kind of gone in different directions. Where you thought, oh, I thought you would have done this, but instead we're doing this. And all that. It's gotten very interesting, especially if you kind of look at Star Wars as both individual pieces of media and then kind of this wider whole singular
mm.
narrative mixed up of all these medias put together. But Dominic, I want to toss this to you as both, as the movie person, someone who loves Star Wars and the canon of it all. Like, where do you stand on like just the basic ideas of artistic intent and what the artist has to say and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I as a as the viewer, as the audience, as the consumer, I am intrigued by what the artist has to say. I'm interested in what they have to say. I'm interested to see how they portray their ideas through their story. Um, but I agree with you. I don't think it's the be all end all. Ultimately, with these things,
Mhm,
uh, all of it is personal to us.
mhm,
And your reaction and your read as the viewer, the audience, the consumer, is ultimately what matters most to you.
mhm,
And so if you watch something and you get a completely different message from the story than the artist intended, well, you can look at it one of two ways. You could say, well, the artist failed because they didn't convey what they were looking to convey, or you could say they succeeded because they elicited
mhm,
some sort of emotion from you. And in this case, we're assuming it's a positive emotion. We're assuming it's like, I I enjoyed that because I love the way it made a point about this. And then the author goes, oh, I wasn't trying to make a point about this. I was trying to make a point about that. Well, okay, that is interesting. That is objectively interesting. I'm someone who's fascinated by the making of
mhm,
Star Wars in particular, but all movies and all stories. I love behind the scenes books. I love documentaries about the making of stuff.
mhm,
It saddens me that we don't get in depth featurettes the way that we used to. Um, And I've presented a panel at Fan Expo that's basically about the behind the scenes of Star Wars and why some things didn't happen. And so like that stuff all fascinates me. So like I want to know what George, what JJ, what Leslie Headland, what Dave Filoni, what Deborah Chow, what any of these folks are thinking with their stories. But
Mhm.
if I feel something different, if they elicit an emotional response from me, then I think that art is successful. Again, positive emotion. If I come away from going, I hate that, unless the point was to make me say I hate that, which is like some sort of like weird artistic experimental thing. If it come away from me going, wow, I really like that, then they've succeeded, and then we get to quibble about why later.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, although I will say, maybe this is just my own weird views of art. I'm actually not 100% opposed, feeling like an anger towards an art, even if you don't like it. Because I kind of have like this weird, twisted sense of like, actually, the worst thing an art can make you feel is absolutely nothing. Um, I'm not going to use Star Wars as
Yes.
an example, but I'm going to use an example of from DC movies. Um, so I don't like Batman versus Superman. Really don't like that movie.
Mhm.
I came out going, "Wow, that was stupid." Um, but I at least felt something when I saw that movie and like was fascinated by, "Wow, what is this mess?" Where
Mhm.
then the next DC film I saw was the Jared Leto Suicide Squad movie,
Mm.
and I came out of that going, "You don't care." Like
Yeah.
that's how where at least Batman versus Superman, like, "Oh, this is terrible," but I'm, like, fascinated by it, and then with Suicide Squad, I'm like,
Yeah,
"Yeah."
there's a version of bad where it's like, well, that got me to think. That got me to
Right.
think about why I didn't like it. And it made me, especially like if we keep this in the context of, a big franchise like Star Wars, like DC, if it got me to think about, okay, I didn't like let me just pick a random Star Wars story out of the air somehow. I don't know. What could it possibly Rise of Skywalker. I didn't like Rise of Skywalker because, and then it takes me through, the things that I did really like about other things.
Right.
That is, I agree that is better
Mhm.
than going then, like you said, not feeling anything, then coming away going, I was bored, I was uninterested, and in fact, I'm no longer interested in seeing where this story goes next.
That
That is the ultimate. I agree. That's the ultimate sort of failure.
yeah, like, that to me would be like, "Oh, man, that to me would be worse for Star Wars," where I'm like, "Oh, I just don't feel anything," right? Like, I'm just bored.
Yeah.
It's not even like, "What are we doing here?" It's more like, "I'm just bored." But, yeah, so and what's interesting about artistic intent with me in Star Wars is I feel like there's so many layers we could go into, and we will go into it. Like, we have thematic, we have
Mhm,
lore, character, plot,
mhm.
the intent of it all. And, let's just start with some examples. I'm not gonna make it all about the sequel trilogy, but I think the sequel trilogy, in my opinion, are kind of weirdly the most interesting when it comes to
Sure.
this kind of problem, or not this problem, but this phenomenon is okay. We had two directors do the sequels, right?
Mhm,
But what was there, especially when it comes to Force Awakens and Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker is almost its own weird things.
mhm,
But what was their intent was like everything. I'm gonna start something small and then we can work our way up.
mm,
And it's funny enough, it's on the thumbnail. The Knights of Ren. Okay,
mm.
who the heck were the Knights of Ren even supposed to be? Because I truly do believe JJ Abrams, Rian Johnson, and Charles Soule all have very different ideas.
Mhm,
Like, I don't know what those ideas are. Like, with JJ, you maybe be able to like look through the art books and maybe he's like, okay, some sort of cis cult knights thing, like literal knights.
mhm,
With Ryan, I always kind of subscribed to your idea, Dom, was maybe they were Luke's students that Kylo kind of rallied to go with him and, become his
mhm.
posse. And then Charles Soule in the comics, I don't know if you're reading the comics or not, they're kind of these loser dark side pirates. I mean, I love it because I think they're hilarious. But they're kind of like these just losers who are like they were once big and mighty, but now they've kind of fallen from grace and now are kind of Palpatine stooges. Um And and we kind of know, or at least we suspect, that maybe even Leslie Headland had some ideas with the Knights of Ren,
Mhm,
with
mhm.
Chimere. And I guess I'm curious, Dominic. As the viewer, as someone who's interested in this stuff, what do you do with that kind of thought process of, like, Knights of Ren are just these blank slates, and clearly everyone had a very different idea of what we're doing with them, and I guess Charles Soule's kind of winning out because he's written them the most at this point. So, like, kind
Yeah.
of, how do you kind of deal with that as a fan and as a spectator of art? And do you ever did it ever take you out where you kind of are watching the Knights of Ren in this versus that, and kind of realizing, oh, you have very different ideas of what these people are?
Yeah, certainly. Like, I think you used the right word a minute ago, which is, or words, which is blank slate, right?
Mhm.
They pop up for like quite literally a second or two in
Mhm.
Force Awakens. Like, they are on screen very, very, very briefly. There's that throwaway line from Luke in Last Jedi, and then they're there as kind of a vaguely threatening presence in Rise of Skywalker.
Standing
And
there menacingly.
yeah, and you can make any number of versions of that story work. And I think the thing that's key to remember with Star Wars, with any of these big franchises where, like you said, there are multiple people telling the stories, is that nobody owns one idea. At
Mhm.
one time, George Lucas was the final say, and that's why, for as much crazy, crazy stuff as the old expanded universe could do,
Mhm.
there were he had a few things that were no-goes, including, like, you couldn't kill off Luke, Han, and Leia. He had,
Mhm.
a few things like that. I think, like, you couldn't reveal anything about Yoda's species was another one. Like, there were a few things that he had the sort of definitive say, and everybody had to go along with that.
Mhm.
But Star Wars is especially when we get onto the book side of things, it's littered with stuff where a character is created by one person and then somebody else picks up their story somewhere else down the line.
Mhm.
If we go into Legends, a pretty big example of that is Mara Jade. Tim Zahn creates that character. He clearly has a vision for who she could be to Luke, but
Mhm.
then that story gets picked up by other people, and other people get to tell,
Mhm.
the story of how they get married. And Tim Zahn has said, I think he thinks they waited too long to make that happen. And then, other people entirely are
Mhm.
responsible for her death
Mhm.
in the Legacy of the Force series. And that's, I think, when you're signing on to do Star Wars, you
Mhm.
kind of just got to accept that that is part of the deal. And when you're doing something like what JJ was doing originally, which was, I'm just going to do one movie,
Right.
then you're understanding that you're putting things out there, and you may have a really cool idea for the Knights of Ren. I think we don't actually know what JJ's idea for the Knights of Ren is. And he may have something that's really, really cool. It's totally different from what Ryan implied and what Charles Soule has done. And, in a perfect world, if he suddenly found himself, he was Dave Filoni as the new
Sure.
president of Lucasfilm instead of Dave Filoni. And he's like, what? I want to do the Knights of Ren movie. It's probably very, very different. But
Mhm.
because he goes into Force Awakens knowing he's just making the first one,
Mhm.
he's leaving it open. Somebody else has to take the ball and run with it after he's done. He's throwing Knights of Ren in there as a cool visual to hint at something. He knows a little something about the backstory, but he also knows that he doesn't get to tell that next chapter in the story. That is now up to someone else to do. And I think, Rian Johnson understood that very well. And he's been very, the way he talks about Rise of Skywalker is he understood that when he gave up those characters, when he gave up the reins, it was now up to somebody else to figure out what happens next to them. He, whatever ideas he may have,
Mhm.
when he said, I only want to do episode 8, it's now somebody else's ball to play.
Right.
And so when it comes to very, like, specific ideas like that, when it's like a character or a group of characters or a faction, uh, that's where you get this really, like, interesting sort of it's a collage. It's like
Mhm.
little pieces that you don't get the full nice picture,
Right.
right? It's not a painting
Mhm.
where everything is filled in. You get little chunks, and together, when you step back, that's when you see the picture. That's when you go, oh, the Knights of Ren. That's what they are. But when you look up close, you're like, oh, okay, are they space pirate force losers? Are they Luke's? Or they Kylo's friends from the Academy? Are they a spin-off of the Sith that was started by Khmer the Stranger because Plagueis ditched him as an apprentice and took on Palpatine as an apprentice? Is that what they are? Is that, and if we squint, we can kind of tie together the story. But like I said, yeah, collage is kind of the word for it. Of it makes a picture, but it's not perfectly clean, and that is the beauty, and maybe for some folks the frustration of a large franchise with many creative voices all contributing to it. I guess we can also throw in the guys who did the Lego specials too, right? Like they did a vision of the Knights of Ren with Christian Slater as Ren and everything. Like, and it's a lot like what Charles is doing in sort of vague terms, but it's still not quite. It's still kind of its own thing too.
Yeah. And you bring up the joys and the frustrations, and it's like, I always understand why people get frustrated, like why there's no singular kind of voice for the sequels.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a unique way to make a trilogy, and obviously it didn't pan out the way it originally was going to pan out with 3 different people instead of just going back to 2. Whether or not anyone could have done an episode 9 that kind of sewed all of it together. I don't know. Maybe with more time behind it, sure. But it kind of really does fall on 9. But again, I also understand. JJ Abrams sets up a bunch of stuff. And I would love to true serum JJ Abrams and like ask him what was Snoke in Force Awakens, man. Like, was he always a Palpatine clone, or was that a last minute addition? And maybe he doesn't have an answer. Maybe he does. I don't know.
Well, and this is the thing. Like, there's the story that they tell us about
Right.
the making of these movies, and everybody's very adamant that like it was a handoff from JJ to Ryan. But JJ is a producer or an executive producer on episode 8. He likely read the script. He likely had some notes. It wouldn't surprise me if the two guys had a meeting at some point where they talked about ideas. I suspect Ryan was given a big binder of information of like, here is the script, here is some backstory stuff we worked on. Feel free to use it. Feel free to come up with something better. And that's what he set out to do. The interesting thing with the sequels is the original plan was for there to be one creative voice behind it. That what they are doing now with the Simon Kinberg trilogy of having a writer be responsible for plotting out and plotting out and writing the trilogy, that was originally supposed to be Michael Arndt's job. When Kathleen Kennedy first approached Michael Arndt, she asked him to do all 3. And he was kind of the first person to go, that's too much. That is too much for me to do. I can start with 1. I can start with 7. And even from that, they, I think originally the plan was to work from George's outlines. And so they had George's rough outlines, and then they were going to give them to Michael, and Michael was going to turn those into palatable movies. That was the idea. And then it was Abrams and Bob Iger and folks who came in and sort of went, well, we really want this movie to be something different. We appreciate what George is doing, but and this is me putting words into their mouth a little bit because we don't know exactly how it played out, but it's a little too weird, right? It's a little too weird. So like, let's do something that is more consciously building off of what we of hitting familiar notes to A New Hope, but also trying to create something new. Abrams has said, like, the guiding principle on Star Wars Episode 7 was, anything that we write has to bring us that same feeling that we felt watching a Star Wars movie for the first time. And knowing, what JJ grew up with the original trilogy. So his version of that is very original trilogy centric. And so he might look at, weird outlines that George Lucas has come up with where Darth Maul is somehow the villain and it's going to involve the microscopic bacteria worlds of the Force and all this stuff and go, whoa,
I don't know how to do that.
That doesn't give me the feeling that I'm looking for. Like that's strange. And so instead of trying to work from that and design a story that gives you those same feelings that he's looking for from George's outlines, he says we're starting over. We're going to take some of the concepts from this, those two lead characters, Rey and Finn, or as they were known back then, Kira and Sam. We're going to take them and we're going to take this idea of Luke Skywalker being off on an island, kind of gone crazy a little bit, and we're going to do our own thing. And, George was admittedly not thrilled with that. He was not happy about it, but he had sold his company by that point, so he couldn't really say anything. I had a point, but I've just gotten lost. I'm right in the middle, Joel. I'm right in the middle of doing a bit of a research project on the sequel trilogy.
Oh, nice. I'll send you a blog. I want to send you a blog then later because I might help you with that about episode 9.
Please do, because I'm really like right in the world of the writing of The Force Awakens right now. So I just kind of got lost in sharing stories.
Oh no, that's fine.
I had a point, but I've completely lost it.
I actually have an interesting point about Force Awakens in terms of just that movie as an individual piece in terms of both like artistic intent versus what we got. Because the funny thing is, I'm more about like character arcs in the sequels, and like because of that, the character arcs are either weird, incomplete, or they kind of evolve. And weirdly, one character arc, which weirdly still does work, but I think you can make an argument that they did pivot after Force Awakens, Kylo Ren / Ben Solo, because I do think that in Force Awakens, and you can kind of see the remnants of this with the Duel of Fate script, that Kylo Ren in the drafts, in the concepts, may have not been planned to get the redemption arc. They might have. I know even Adam Driver talked about, no, this is like reverse Vader. This is like, hey, what if Vader didn't have the suit and went full on dark by the end? And you could even argue it's still kind of there in Last Jedi, but I think Ryan and Adam kind of play it more nuanced. And
I would go so far as to say it is still there in Last Jedi. Like, like the way it ends. The whole movie is building up where you're thinking it's the redemption arc, right? You're thinking it's the redemption arc. We're following a redemption arc. And then what happens? He's looking at the throne and he realizes what he wants more than anything else in the galaxy is that seed, is that power. And that's when he turns on Rey. Even who, I think they both had, enjoyed their partnership, enjoyed their allyship up until that point, in its own sort of weird way. But he turns on her. He doesn't want anything to do with her. And then when they get to Crate, he is ruthless, right? He tells Hux to go in there and, take no prisoners, right? Like that, there is no, there's no hesitation anymore. He just wants to take them. And I think there is a version of episode 9 that takes off from Rey severing the connection at the end and like closing the Falcon thing in his face through the Force bond, that has Kylo Ren not be redeemed. And 9 starts from a place where he's pretty evil, and I think you could have played that. But I also, one of the things I do enjoy about episode 9 is that I do think the Kylo Ren Ben Solo redemption is handled pretty well. I think that
until he dies, but that's
yes, until he dies. But that is one of the movie's stronger points until you're right, that very end.
Funny enough, and another character too, and this is again, in terms of the artistic intent, Poe, who I would argue if like there's a second character who I think is pretty okay across the trilogy in terms of an arc, it's Poe. I mean, I don't like the Spice Runner retcon into the end, but I argue this because I do think you kind of look. I mean, obviously, Poe in Force Awakens, he was supposed to die, and then he just comes back. So much of the love of Poe in Force Awakens is just Oscar Isaac and his charisma. But I do think, and this is again where I'll give Rise of Skywalker credit, it does build off of Last Jedi, where Poe's whole arc in Last Jedi, and I think throughout then the rest of the sequels is you think, oh, he's kind of like going to be our Han. He's the hot shot pilot, right?
Mhm.
But Leia's like, nope, you're not the hot. You're my protege. You're going to go into politics, and you're going to be the chancellor one day, and you're going to be commander and sit in the Akbar chair. And I mean, I guess he does still become a pilot at the end of the Battle of Exegol, but he does get promoted to general, and so again, it's that interesting thing of, and this is where I kind of think the whole conversation comes down to is, again, when do we look at the collage, and when are we looking at the individual piece, and kind of when we're talking about these things in a vacuum versus the wider breadth. And I just always think that's just such a fascinating discussion topic of like, and I guess I am kind of curious, Dominic,
Mhm.
when you are watching these movies, be it the prequels, the originals, the sequels, do you see it more from the collage of the wider Star Wars that you've intaked over the years,
Mm.
or are you watching it as that individual piece? And I'll just to use the ultimate example, when you watch Star Wars 1977, is Vader Anakin Skywalker in your head at that moment, or is he Darth Vader who killed Anakin Skywalker?
You're right,
Or
right. I I tend to when I'm watching them, right,
Mhm,
I tend to be thinking about
right.
the story that's in front of me and the story that's in front of me only. So, I'm less thinking about what comes next in terms of,
Mhm,
real world production, and more about what is right in front of me. So, yeah, there is that kind of cognitive dissonance when you're watching A New Hope
mhm,
of, is this A New Hope or is this Star Wars? And if it's Star Wars, like you said, it's a different story. If it's A New Hope, it's built off Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, the Clone Wars, Andor, Rogue One, Solo, uh, Obi-Wan Kenobi, like all of those things that came before, the Acolyte, like it's built off all of those things. But if it's Star Wars, then it's the very first story we've ever seen in this universe. And and yeah, a lot of the things that we know, quote unquote, don't exist in it. And like, Obi-Wan, Vader, Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker are two separate characters. Vader betrayed and murdered your father. Quite literally, Darth Vader was friends with Anakin Skywalker, or we don't even know if the name Anakin was, well, it was around, but uh, Darth Vader was friends with Anakin Skywalker, then said, "Haha, I am no longer your friend. I am your enemy," and killed him. And then Obi-Wan and then Ben Kenobi and Darth Vader had a fight on the side of a volcano, and and that
right.
ended up with Darth Vader in the suit. Um, all of that's, I because we know all this stuff, when I'm watching the movie, I'm almost like thinking of both, right? Like it's like I'm kind of having that experience of like, you know, he betrayed and murdered your father. Well, I know what happens in Revenge of the Sith. I'm thinking about all that stuff, and I'm
Mhm,
thinking like, "Oh, that's how they've made that work." But I'm also thinking like, when Sir Alec Guinness said that line, he was thinking about something completely different. And so for me, I am kind of holding those two thoughts in my head at the same time, and neither one is really winning out. I guess ever so slightly, the original version wins out,
mhm.
just because I almost think that's kind of more fun. To because I really enjoy following the evolution of the story, and
Me
how
too.
they had to go back and retcon it, and
Mhm.
do all this stuff, and why they had to do that. Um, I really enjoy that side of it, and so in that sense, I'm thinking more about that ever so slightly, because I am also thinking about Revenge of the Sith and Attack of the Clones.
Here's a great example for me where I kinda have kind of that, and I don't at the same time. When I watch Revenge of the Sith, Ahsoka doesn't exist. And I
Yeah.
know that, I mean, and I say that, as an Ahsoka fan, like, I'm not a
Yeah,
hater,
yeah,
like,
same, yeah.
Ahsoka doesn't exist. She did not exist. None of that stuff happened. There's no what Mortis, what is that? That doesn't exist, right? Um, when I watch, say, I mean, I guess, well, you did because he's technically in it, Rise of Skywalker, Ahsoka
Mhm.
does exist. All those episodes of Clone Wars did happen, that lore, that continuity does exist. I mean, that's such a weird thing to say, but that because that Rise of Skywalker came out after Clone Wars and after Rebels, so it's like those things that are retroactively been added to the narrative do exist and now affect that movie. And
Mhm.
it's that weird thing to me, right? Where or like here's another example, kind of. I did a Rogue One rewatch after Andor
Mm.
with my dad because we
Mhm.
watched Andor and we watched Rogue One, and I tried to view it with the eyes of with Andor, and it works for the most part, but there is a little bit of that. You can kind of still tell that Andor didn't happen yet with
Yeah.
Rogue One. It's not a like Luthen doesn't exist. Kathleen had a very different backstory if you read the visual dictionary of
Mm.
Rogue One. And, so it's kind of that weird situation where it's like I'm kind of retroactively have more things in my head for like newer stuff because it's
Mm.
affecting it than kind of retroactively going back and like, okay, they've explained all the Project Necromancer stuff now in Rise of Skywalker. Which, by the way, which is another one of those things
Yeah.
where it's like, what was the artistic intent of that? Because like, yeah, we can say Palpatine clone essence transfer, Dark Empire, all that good stuff. But I honestly sometimes wonder if like Chris Terrio, if I had to sit down with Chris Terrio, it's like he'd tell me, "Oh no, that's Palpatine's original body. They found it and just Frankensteined it back together." And it's like, okay then, all right.
There
Clear.
there is a there was a cut line from the movie that Ian McDiarmid has
Yeah,
talked about where it's like, more than a clone, not
less
quite a
than.
something. So like they're
Yeah,
playing a little fast and loose with it and they're intentionally leaving it open to some level of uh
right.
interpretation there. Um
Um,
yeah,
but no.
I'll tell you one of the trippiest recent Star Wars projects I think is the Ahsoka show and
Mhm,
seeing Hayden Christensen
I love it,
talk
but yeah.
to, Ahsoka Tano, because, uh, Rosario Ahsoka existed both in real world and the story after the Clone Wars.
Right.
So, it's very easy to just take all we already knew about, the character from the Clone Wars and just project it onto the live action version of it.
Mhm,
As you said, when I watch Revenge of the Sith, yeah, Ahsoka doesn't exist.
mhm.
When Anakin says my powers have doubled since we last met, Count, he's talking about Geonosis. He's not
Not
talking about
last Tuesday.
7 other times they fought in the Clone Wars, which never bothered me, by the way, on the
Yeah.
show. It never bothered me. I think I started to think it was funny. Um, I know people would get really annoyed. I remember back in the day when the show was on, people would get really, really annoyed about it. I'm like, it's just kind of funny at this point that it just kept happening.
George didn't
Uh,
care. He's like, I
yeah,
don't.
but at the same time, they were so committed to never having Anakin and Grievous meet because of that one line in Revenge of the Sith. It's like um,
The elevator scene.
the one thing you care about versus the thing that you don't care about.
I
It's
know.
sort of funny. But to take Hayden's Anakin,
Mhm,
who, yeah, Hayden looks 20 years older. We all do. um, but is pretty much
mhm.
the Anakin from Revenge of the Sith. Like that's the same costume and everything when he first pops up in the world between worlds at the end of episode 4, beginning of episode 5. You take that Anakin and project all of the Clone Wars onto him. It's a different experience, I find, because that version of Anakin that I see is the version of Anakin that I remember from episode 3, who didn't know all that stuff. When they shot it, George wasn't sitting there explaining the Umbara arc to Hayden Christensen on out there in Sydney on one of those green screen sets, right? Like that didn't happen.
Right.
Uh, but Anakin does know. And so it's an interesting I find it to be kind of an interesting intellectual exercise of like, having to, you know, just, get used to the idea, and it's, it should be something that we are used to in general in Star Wars because the prequels were made after the original. So it's not something that's new, but each time it happens, it does take a little getting used to of this story pretends that everything was told in order. which it has to, right? It has to for the characters within that story. And ultimately, what is most important is the story that is being told within those 40 minutes each week, or within the 2 hours of the movie, or within the 350 pages of the book, right? Like that is what has to work most. It has to work on an emotional, intellectual level for the audience. That is what has to work. So yeah, that's where we have to, for Anakin's story to work, for Ahsoka's story to work in Ahsoka, we have to just pretend that everything happened in order. But as the audience, we know it didn't. And so it's a little bit weird. It's just a little bit weird, but it's fun too. It's fun too. Like that's like, when we're talking about this, I never want to come across like I'm complaining about it.
Oh no,
because I actually think it's really, really fun.
I love
really,
it.
really fun, as what we were just talking about with A New Hope going. Yeah, Alec Guinness, Mark Hamill, they are talking about a whole other backstory. They're telling a whole other backstory, but we're gonna pretend it makes sense with the one that we know about. We're going to, from a certain point of view, this. And same thing, we're gonna pretend that Hayden Christensen's Anakin was there for all of those events of the Clone Wars, because he was. As far as the story is concerned, he was. And as far as the story is concerned now, episodes 1, 2, and 3, that's the backstory that Alec Guinness and Mark Hamill are talking about.
And I love it too. I love it, like when we start to see Red Thing kind of retroactively added in, like the minute I remember somebody saying, like, hey, the minute after Rise of Skywalker came out, Bad Batch season 1. I think did Bad Batch season 1 happen after Rise? It
was 2021.
And then it's like the whole arc is just about cloning and the Emperor's cloning plan. So it's like we're not going to retroactively add that in. I am curious though to kind of go back to like character stuff though. Do you ever? Did it ever sometimes though feel like it's a different character, but just in name only? And I'm going to use an interesting example, Maul, because we have Maul of the prequels. He dies. He comes back in the Clone Wars, and he has this kind of whole arc in animation, which is great, and we're going to see more of it in a couple months. From rebirth to death, and then there's that bit in Solo. Which it would have been cool if it had continued. Although the actor now playing live action Maul here, but
he's going through stuff.
Yeah. But
Put it mildly.
When I see Maul return in a Solo for like those 5 seconds, which is awesome, by the way. I'm not saying it's terrible. I love it, and that was to me a big one of the reasons why I love that moment. Kind of to give some praise to Solo, which I don't praise enough a lot, but I do want to give this praise. Is that was the movie to me that said, "Oh, you're going to take the animation as seriously as the live action, and it's not going to be this weird kind of dichotomy where it's like animation's over here, and we're going to ignore it, and then live action's kind of its own little thing." Like, oh no, this will impact things in live action, maybe. In a big way. But when I see Maul, I'm like, oh, that's Clone Wars Maul. Prequel Maul died in Phantom Menace, and artistically intent, he was supposed to stay dead, unless George brought him back. And then, if he came back in George's sequels, which again, who knows how permanent that was, or just some ideas George is tossing around in the ether. That's gonna be, Clone Wars Maul return. And you could argue, like, yeah, when he got reborn, he kind of became a different person, just in terms of like the artistry and the story of the character. But there's also that intellectual side of you where it's like, oh yeah, Maul's dead. Maul died. He was always dead. He wasn't around when you watch Return of the Jedi. That sort of thing. I mean, I'm sorry, but I kind of had this one more thought. Another thing is, and even though I don't care, I still like it either way, but it's like, Vader killing the Emperor is not because of this chosen one prophecy that's kind of the grand culmination of everything. It's like, no, the Emperor's killing his kid. Vader's like, hey, stop doing that. Tossing over you on the bridge, not, I'm the chosen one of the prophecy and I'm going to fulfill it last. So, sorry for the ramble there. But yeah, did you ever have that where it's like, it's a different character almost, even if it's still the actor and the look, obviously?
Yeah, I'll get to Maul in a second. I'll just say about the prophecy, right? Like, that one, I'm actually really okay with the prophecy, because I my favorite version of prophecy is in stories is when like it's super vague, and so it can come true, just never in the way that you're expecting expecting.
Oh, I love that too. Don't get me wrong.
And like that's very much there in Revenge of the Sith, where Anakin sees Padme dying in childbirth, and so he makes it happen. That's one version of it, where like you see it happening, and in trying to prevent it, you make it happen. Whereas if you just sort of let it play out, probably Padme's not giving birth under that level of distress. I like to think that the technology of the galaxy far, far away is advanced enough that childbirth is not as dangerous for them as it even still is to this day, and it's much safer now than it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago. But there's other versions of the prophecy where it's just like, oh, I was certain this would happen, and I'm in addition to this sequel trilogy research project, I'm very enmeshed in the world of Ice and Fire right now, with Night of the Seven Kingdoms being on, and it was rereading it was reread the short stories that series is based on, and have been like getting back into the lore and the fandom of that. And there's I think George Martin loves this idea too, because there's so many Targaryens that have so many different visions of what is essentially Daenerys, what happens at the end of the first season in the first book, and they try and like make it happen because they only have like a piece of it, and then they interpret it to be about them, and so they have to assume it's about them. And there's also there's something coming up this season in the show, and I won't say anything more, where there's an instance of a character who sort of has a prophecy, has a vision of the future, doesn't understand it, and believes it to be something else. And you learn by the end of that short story or novella, and likely will happen in the season, that the prophecy comes true, just very much not in the way that character believed it was. So Anakin brings balance to the Force, sure, but the only way that was ever going to happen was not by him going, like you said, it's not him, I bring balance to the Force. It only happens because of the story that happens, because of the journey that he goes on. And it's almost like it's almost just sort of like a unintended consequence of his own personal journey. Like, I love that. With Maul, I think Maul is an interesting example. Like you said, when he's resurrected, he is a very different character. He fills a very different role in the story, because in Phantom Menace, right, Maul isn't a character the way Qui-Gon is a character.
He's a design.
Yeah, he's an obstacle, and he's kind of like a metaphor. Like he's there to be an obstacle for the Jedi, for Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and he's also, George always says that the three villains of the prequels, each movie represents a different part of Darth Vader. Grievous is the cyborg, Dooku's kind of the swordsman, or Dooku's kind of the statesman and the military political leader, and Maul is the weapon. Like he's the power, he's the fighter, the way Vader is. And so that's what Maul is meant to represent. He's meant to represent one part of Vader as Sidious tries to figure out how to craft his ultimate apprentice. He tries different pieces of it, and he needs to find someone that brings together all those pieces. So that's all Maul really is. So you kill him off at the end of the movie because he served his purpose. That's he's done. There's no longer a purpose in the story. But artists are like everyone else. They change their mind. Change their mind. We all change our minds sometimes. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go out tomorrow, but actually, no, I do. I want to go out tomorrow. I wanted to have pizza for dinner. No, actually, I want to have burgers. Like, we all change our mind. And I think, in the decade between Phantom Menace and when George would have started to think about bringing Maul back, he probably went, I wonder what else we could have done with this character. I wonder what else we could have been. And then you start to fill in the backstory, and you start to fill it in. It kind of becomes pretty interesting, because Sidious wouldn't have known he's just taking one piece of his ultimate apprentice here.
Right.
He wouldn't have known that. He would have thought at the time Maul is his ultimate apprentice. That means that Maul should have filled not only Vader's role, but Dooku's role. And all of a sudden you're like, that's really interesting. And suddenly the character of Maul takes shape. He's no longer just a stand-in for an obstacle and a stand-in for an idea suddenly is a fully formed character, and that's where you get to the idea. And I can't remember if it was Filoni or Whitwer or who it was that said this, but Darth Maul looks like the devil. He's looks literally like the devil. And so, what's the scariest thing the devil could do when he walks into a room with you? Is it start a fight, or is it sit down and have a conversation with you? And they've made this version of Maul, and it's really evident in the trailer with that tea ceremony he seems to be doing.
Yeah.
That the scariest thing he can do is sit down and have a conversation with you, because he's gonna make some good points. He's gonna make it real interesting, and he's gonna make you want to join him, even though making that deal with the devil is ultimately the wrong thing to do. But he's gonna make it seem like it's the right thing to do, and then still be that physical fighting threat.
I agree. I got a couple more points before. One thing I understand why the sequels didn't do certain things that they did. Although weirdly enough, I feel like that's maybe why I like Rise of Skywalker, because I feel like it's the closest to what I would have liked. Where we talk about retroactiveness and stuff like that, where it's like one movie Ahsoka doesn't exist, and then this one she does. The thing about the sequels, especially Force Awakens, a little less Last Jedi, and even a little less Rise of Skywalker in its own bizarre way, is I always feel like, yes, they're connected to the original trilogy and tangentially the prequels, but I also feel like they're not culminating everything else that has come before. Like, there doesn't feel like Clone Wars happened in the sequels. It doesn't feel like, those things happen. We don't need to reference everything, of course. I don't want stories to just be reference machines, of course.
Right.
But they don't synthesize, what has come before, I think, perfectly in ways that I would like. And like where weirdly, like Ahsoka, weirdly enough, maybe, and some of the Mandoverse recently, maybe that's why I've enjoyed it, is I feel like they are better at, and this is maybe just Filoni's thing, is of synthesizing all the various elements of Star Wars that have come before and after. I mean, we don't need like Palpatine on Exegol and Ahsoka or anything like that. But like, yeah, here's Hayden's Anakin, here's the Clone Wars, here's Thrawn from Rebels, here's original trilogy stuff, and Night Sisters. Whereas uh, I feel like the artistic intent in kind of feel a little shaky with the sequels in some way, because like, I mean, obviously, yes, there's thematic stuff and it's brilliant, especially with Last Jedi. But it's like there is no Ahsoka reference, or Maul wasn't the villain, which would have been cool, because like, hey, Maul came back in animation. Let's build up to something. It's sort of like why. Oh, here's a great one. Here's a great one for artistic intent. Mortis. How important, honestly, is Mortis? Because I've always kind of low key joked with Matthew, and I think we can all kind of maybe agree. Mortis is like the most important, least important thing ever in Clone Wars. And I say that in a sense of, you have the Mortis arc. People love it. I mean, I think it's great. And, but people really latch onto it, and they think this has meaning for something big, right? But it only is that one arc, and it never gets mentioned again in Clone Wars. I think maybe it gets mentioned like maybe one other time with like the Yoda arc stuff. Maybe. I don't even remember. But it's
Yeah.
like it's here and then it's forgotten. And it's like, did it ever have like a bigger, like, did George have bigger plans for Mortis in the sequels? Obviously we know Colin had a Mortis. I always call it Mortis in name only, because I'm always a little bit hesitant to be like, is it Filoni's Mortis though? And but Dave has really dragged out this Mortis thing from Rebels to Ahsoka. And to kind of go back to something you said earlier about how Star Wars, yeah, it's different creatives. No one owns an idea. Dave is kind of the one exception to that rule, because he has sort of been allowed to build out. We call it the Filoni word because he's like allowed to kind of build out his little corner of the pie. And the only other person I can really think who's kind of had a little bit of a verge being able to do that is, I guess, JJ Abrams, because I think Rise of Skywalker probably built on some old ideas from Force Awakens in some ways. I have like theories on like what Exegol even could have been in JJ's mind. And Tony Gilroy, because I always call, because I think he took what he had from Rogue One. It's like, well, let's just take that and go a little further in it. So again, like Mortis is an interesting one where artistic intent comes into play. It's like, was this ever made to be a bigger deal than we as fans made it out to be? and we definitely never know because George never got to do it much more with it afterwards. But Dave was
Yeah.
kind of taking it in his direction.
Well, on the idea that Filoni and Gilroy and Abrams, that they got to sort of carve out their little corners of the galaxy. I think that's just a function of the fact that they did multiple stories, that they stuck around for a while, and I think the reason why, I don't really think there's a Filoni verse. I think it's just he has continued. He's stuck around for longer than anybody else, right? Like he
He's the
got his
president now.
yeah, he got his 20-year statue a couple of weeks ago, right? Like
Right.
he's been around with the company for 2 decades, and so he's been telling stories for 2 decades, and so yeah, his stories are going to be interconnected to each other because that's what he's interested in, and he's building off of what he's done before on Clone Wars, Rebels, Mando, Bad Batch, Ahsoka, everything. That I think it's just a function of he's just been around and he's just continued to tell stories. Whereas, someone like Rian Johnson did one movie and then handed it off. So we don't think about the Rian Johnson verse because it's just one movie.
Right.
We don't think about the Leslie Headland verse because it's just one season.
Sadly.
Sadly. We don't talk about like the Deborah Chow verse because, well, it's one season of Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Closest is Favreau, but it's kind of he's interconnected with Filoni, so they're partners.
And I kind of think it's maybe a little bit of a shot at Favreau that, like, they call it the Filoni verse. It's like he's had as much to do with it recently as Dave. But those are the people that have stuck around, and so they've been able to continue to build on their stories. And I think anybody that sticks around, that's allowed to stick around and earns the right to stick around and is able to, I think they get to do that. And I think that's where we see these things flesh out. And what was the second part of
My second part was just I wanted to kind of talk about Mortis because that's another one where fans have really put their their artistic intent on that arc, and I've always kind of controversially thought that if you just look at Clone Wars, we might have overhyped it in a weird way because of just how little it impacts everything else, in a sense. But now, obviously, with the Rebels, obviously bringing that back, and obviously Ahsoka season 2 probably just being Mortis live action, the series. Mortis might actually have a bigger design on this meta narrative than just that one arc. And
it's interesting, right? Because I with Clone Wars, George is coming up with these things. He's just sort of coming up with what he's interested in, and he's basically telling the Clone Wars writers, like, we're going to do a Star Wars version of this. We're going to do a Star Wars version of Predator. We're going to do a Star Wars version of Godzilla. We're going to do a Star Wars version of Hitchcock movies. Like that's what he's telling them. And then he's working with them to craft these elaborate stories. And with Mortis, I think George, around that time was starting to get into, and he's probably always been into it, but he was really getting into, like, some like metaphysical, like beyond the known universe, different planes of existence stuff. And if you watch, this is really, and when we talk about artistic intent, I think with Star Wars, it's interesting to consider these creatives work outside of Star Wars too, to understand what they're trying to do with Star Wars. So if you watch Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which I know people don't really want to do, but if you do watch it, there is a scene towards the end where John Hurt's character basically describes the world between worlds. Just basically, like, he describes it as being like that's where the alien things are from. Like he's talking about it. I watched it before Dial of Destiny came out just because I was curious. I hadn't seen it since it was in theaters, and I'm like listening to John Hurt deliver these lines. I'm going, wait a minute. What are we talking about? That's Mortis. That's the world between worlds. That's all these things that George did in Clone Wars. And did he have larger, broader plans for it? Well, I think one of the things that, when George started to write his version of the sequel trilogy, when he'd start to do his treatments that he would include in the sale to Disney, that's right when he's in the heart of making the Clone Wars. He's done a couple of seasons of writers' rooms for Underworld at that point. and he's done 5 or 6 seasons,
Mhm.
actually probably 7 seasons by that point, of writers' rooms for the Clone Wars. So a lot of a lot of the things that he's been thinking about for Star Wars are what's included in the Clone Wars, and if he's excited enough about those ideas to want to turn them into 7, 8, and 9,
Mhm.
then I think a lot of clues for what he was thinking for 7, 8, 9 are found in the Clone Wars episodes that we've seen and the Underworld episodes that we never did see. Um, Not in the sense that I think we're gonna pull literal plot points, not in the sense that I think he was setting things up, but just some of those ideas that he was thinking about. And those like handful of quotes that we have from him from the Paul Duncan book, like the archives book, and from that interview he did with Jim Cameron a few years ago for whatever project it was that Cameron was working on, where he talked about what he was thinking for 7, 8, 9. You hear it and it sounds
Mortisy.
like Mortisy. It sounds like Yoda arc-y stuff.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't surprise me if the things that they started to establish in those stories were things he was really thinking about to put into his into what he thought 7, 8, and 9 should be. Because this idea that he started to play with in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull finds his way into Clone Wars, right?
Right.
And the World Between Worlds, yes, he didn't specifically create that. That is a Filoni creation, but I think that that's something that Filoni created based on those conversations that they had in the Clone Wars writers' rooms, and things that George was about um, uh, spelling out about the Star Wars galaxy and what he was thinking about it and what he was thinking about on like the bigger metaphysical picture. Like, George was talking about midichlorians long before that was ever a thing in the movies, right? Like he's
Right.
allegedly was talking about that all the way back in the 70s. So I kind of think that uh what am I getting at? What am I getting at here? Um, he was it's there. Mortis was something that he was thinking about. And World Between Worlds was something that he was thinking about, and Filoni took that and actually put it to screen in a way that is maybe not exactly what George would have done, but it's pretty close to it. And it all sort of, functions in a way that yeah, I would it wouldn't shock me if George's version of the sequels had involved something to do with Mortis, had involved something to do with the World Between Worlds. And I think it's very telling that the guy who was there for those conversations in the Clone Wars writers room is now putting those ideas to screen in live action in Ahsoka too, and
Mhm.
presumably beyond with Filoni. And yeah, I Clone Wars writers rooms, Underworld writers rooms, like, oh,
Mhm.
what you wouldn't give to be a fly on the wall in those meetings. And like the one instance of like where we get to be that is on the 2011 Blu-ray box set, where they
Mhm.
include like a 3 or 5 minute clip of George in the Clone Wars writers room talking about the Force. I think it must have been in relation to the Yoda arc.
Oh,
Uh
yeah.
and it's just fascinating, and like I've heard, people have said there's longer versions of that exist, compared to what we saw on the Blu-ray, but just what we got on the Blu-ray is so tantalizing,
I'm
and it really has nothing to do with breaking the story. They're
No,
not
no.
going, okay, Yoda does this, then Yoda does this, then Yoda does this, but it's about understanding the Force so that you can understand Yoda's journey within it.
I was listening to a podcast that apparently said George has, like, a binder for the Mortis what Mortis is and what he thought it was, and I'm kind of curious if Filoni's probably going with that binder.
I think I
Um
think I think Dave refers back to that binder regularly, and I think Dave has probably created his own binder that
Oh, yeah.
builds off a lot of what was in George's binder, and
I
maybe throws out a few ideas too, like maybe goes, that doesn't really work.
we're
That's
not gonna kill
that's
Ahsoka. We're not gonna kill her. She's fine.
that's George. That's too weird, or that's too George. We can't go quite that far.
Not nah, I don't like this killing Ahsoka idea, but
Yeah,
I
right.
do like this Mortis, this wolves idea.
Yeah,
So I think for our kind of last kind of little part of this discussion, part in terms of artistic intent is when artists, I would argue, go against the artistic intent, and whether or not you like it, you don't like it. And I say go against it. I'm not necessarily like in like a big way. I mean,
Mm.
sometimes that's possible, like sometimes people get balance of the force wrong. But I'm actually gonna use a more an interesting idea because it's something that I remember Underworld talked about, and I've talked about this with my friends as well,
Mm.
and that is how bad is Han Solo? And I mean how bad, I mean how bad a guy was he? Because okay, so I think in A New Hope, or the original Star Wars '77, I do think George was like, no, this is a bad dude. He shot first. He kills Greedo in cold blood. He smuggles spice, which is space. That kind of stuff. He's a bad man
Mhm.
until he meets Luke and Leia, and then kind of realizes, oh, maybe I'm actually not that bad a guy, and I want to help these people. But over the years, in both the EU and I would even argue in Solo, a Star Wars story, we've really tried to soften him up. We've said like, oh no, the spice he smuggled is like medicine that the Empire is trying to prevent from getting on the planet. He always helps the Wookiee slaves because of Chewie. He worked for the Empire, but he needed the money, right? And in Solo, a Star Wars story, he sounds like, I'm a bad dude here. Like I'm a bad dude, and like Kira's
Mhm.
like, no, Han, you're a good guy. you-
Mhm.
you're a good guy in your heart, and you're helping these people. You're not me. I'm the bad person here. That's why I don't want you to be with me, and that's why I always kind of interpreted Kira's choice as like she doesn't want to corrupt Han because she knows Han is a good
Mm.
person, and she feels like she'll just drag him down that dark path. It's like no, like
Mm.
that's why I love it when she meets Leia, where she's like, like yeah, Leia, you're good for Han. Han needs you. He needs to be the man you need to be. Um, and I've always kind of wondered is like have artists over the years gone against maybe the original idea for Han of like
Mm.
maybe we've tried to soften him a little too much before we get to A New Hope? It's almost like the reverse of some people have argued of Anakin Vader, where like maybe George went too hard on how bad Vader got before. Like, damn, is this guy redeemable? Or he's like he's killing the young ones,
Mm.
and like and then even people have kind of done about retroactive like, well, we either softened him or we hardened him too much, and it's like, well, I'll use Han as sort of the example where it's like, have we softened Han too much to where like, oh yeah, he was just like one good day from just being a good guy again, like his blackened heart was not that black as we think.
Yeah. There's something kind of funny in Solo is that Han spends so much of that movie trying to convince everybody that he is,
Mhm.
the scoundrel, that he is a bad guy. And everybody kind of looks at him and go, nah, you're a good guy.
Mhm.
You're a good guy in your core. And he even does the right thing at the end of that movie. He gets his one little vial of quaxium,
Mhm.
but he gives the rest to Enfys Nest.
Mhm.
And Han Solo is he has to be a character. He's a character who's the scoundrel with a heart of gold.
Right.
And I do think that, yeah, in the original movie, he's meant to be a badder guy than he is.
Mhm.
Um, but this is where taking Star Wars and turning it into the expanded universe that we love. And I don't mean the Legends verse. I mean just having so many other
Mhm.
stories where it's where it's with books, comics, movies, shows. When you go back to these legacy characters,
Mhm.
you know, do people actually want a movie where Han Solo is just an a-hole the whole time?
Mhm.
Is that what people actually want? I think a lot of people would say, "Yes, yes, that is what I actually want," and some of them might actually mean it, and some of them might actually enjoy that movie. But I think most people, when you go in to see Solo, a Star Wars story, when you go in to see the Han Solo movie, you want a Han Solo that feels like the Han Solo you remember.
Right.
And does Solo go too far in its little winks at his future? Like, do we need to know how he got the gun? Like that, maybe. Yeah, I think it probably does. But it gives you a really, really fun Han Solo story. It's a
Mhm.
really, really, really fun Han Solo story. And if you're gonna do prequels like that, you almost always inherently wind up softening the character because you need to humanize them.
Mhm.
You need to make them more interesting. Um, with Vader, there's this kind of an interesting conversation of, people during the prequels, or especially post Attack of the Clones, are like, oh, they made Darth Vader into this whiny little so and so, right? Like he isn't the badass, heartless, cruel killer that we imagined him to be.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, it's a boring story if he just is automatically evil. George said, this said about the episode one Anakin, like people wanted 10-year-old Vader to be like ripping the wings off of bugs and stuff, like, like really like sort of cruel, sadistic stuff.
That's
Um,
Palpatine's backstory, in my
yeah.
opinion.
Well, actually, we can talk about Palpatine in a second.
Oh, yeah.
But it's so much more interesting as a story. Like, take out forget what you know about Darth Vader in the original trilogy,
Mhm.
which the prequels kind of ask you to do, which is and just say, okay, we're gonna tell a story of how this sweet little kid becomes an evil person.
Mhm.
How does his own selfishness that comes from a place we all understand, how
Mhm.
does that lead him to make all sorts of terrible decisions? How is he manipulated by people around him with ulterior motives? Palpatine's function in the story is to be whispering in Anakin's ears saying, those selfish feelings you have, those are the ones you should be listening to. Those are what you should be listening to. If you listen to that, they'll make you more powerful than you'll get what you want.
Mhm.
Nobody ever gives you what you want. And I do think is a function, a part of the story of how are we failed by our institutions?
Mhm.
Whether that's the Jedi, whether that's the Republic, whatever it is, all of that stuff
Mhm.
uh contributes to Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader. And so to make the story compelling, to make this downfall compelling, you have to humanize the character. He can't be this cruel killer
Right.
from the beginning. And so when you go to do a prequel about Han Solo, you have to humanize him. And even though his humanization story, for for lack of a better term, happens in A New Hope, you have to do some other version of that. And the version they settle on for Solo, and for a lot of other stories like it, is he's trying to convince everybody he's that killer, that badass killer, but is actually kind of a little bit of a buffoon.
I
And also has the heart of gold. And now you mentioned Palpatine, right? We don't know Palpatine's backstory. We get a version of it in Darth Plagueis, but that's very like that's a political story. It's a summary. Like I love that novel. Don't get me wrong. I think it's fascinating and a great read. Uh, but it's a different kind of story. We've never gotten an on-screen Palpatine backstory, and the closest we were going to come,
Mhm.
the closest that we've come to that is would have been in Underworld.
Right.
There was to be this story, there was to be this reveal of Palpatine's backstory and how he became evil, and it's, kind of a little bit controversial because, it's basically he gets his heart broken, and we've only heard this from, like, one guy who was a video game designer who got to read the scripts because he was working on 1313, and the way he tells it is like, "This heartless woman broke his heart, broke him, and now and that's
Right.
why he became evil," and it's sort of like, you know, it's a kind of a bad cliche of man becomes evil because woman broke his heart.
Mhm.
Um, but if we kind of try and imagine a better version of that, where and probably a version of that that's more true to what we would have seen on screen,
Mhm.
it would have been a humanization of Palpatine where he wanted to believe that he had found love, companionship, friendship, whatever it was,
Great
and then was
grandma. Just kidding.
and then was betrayed by somebody he thought he could trust.
Mhm.
Not unlike Kira leaving Han behind in Solo. Um, But that would have humanized Palpatine, and then we probably would have had some people going, I don't like this version of Palpatine where he's crying over a girl who broke his heart. Like, you'd have people saying that because the function that he serves in his
Mhm.
introduction story, be it episode 1 or episode 6, it works in both. Or episode 5. When I'm not gonna count episode 5.
Right.
It's just a hologram to do a little bit of teasing of the future. But really for 6 and 1, he is this like villain who's pulling all the strings, who's got all these machinations, and he's really, really evil, and you cannot imagine any sort of like redemption. And that's what Darth Vader was for so long in the original trilogy. For especially for 4 and 5, it's only in 6 that you start to get hints of it, but really you don't fully understand it till 1. So
What's interesting about Vader, in a weird sense, is I feel like in some ways you could argue in some ways, I almost feel like we both have tried to humanize him more and even weirdly dehumanize him at the same time. And what I mean by that is,
mm,
and we can make this maybe our last point as we kind of wrap up. I think Vader's redemption in the original trilogy,
mm,
especially by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, overall works because I feel like it's gonna sound weird. You don't see Vader do a lot of evil things. I
mm.
know that's weird to say. Like, okay, like yes, in Episode 5, I think that's when you see him do the most evil things. He chokes a lot of his officers out. That doesn't sound right in my when I say it out loud. And, he kidnaps Han and stuff like that. But that's kind of and then by the time you get Return of the Jedi, that's kind of when he's a little bit more like, oh, my son, kind of
Mm.
I'm the Emperor's just toy thing, and I'm just gonna do what my master tells me, or he'll just kick my butt. Right? But then you get to, but then you kind of see like the comics, even some of the books a little bit,
Mm.
and even Kenobi, which funny enough, and you know, and even the prequels to some extent with Episode 3, but especially like some of the comics and book where just like at Kenobi, you see Vader come into this random town and village and he just starts killing people, like just civilians. Like, there's like one kid who's just like, I think it's like a teenager, like, hey, my dad. And he's Vader just like, like he just snaps that guy's neck. Like, Vader's just like, oh, I'm not having this. I want Kenobi dead, and I'm just gonna kill everybody in my path.
Yeah.
And obviously and then we even see Hayden's Anakin literally killing the younglings again. We just
Mm.
killed. And it's sort of like obviously, yes, in the context of Return of the Jedi and trilogy redemption work, but like, I feel like the more evil you see Anakin and Vader do, the
Mm.
harder it is to like justify like him being a happy Force ghost, being like.
Mm.
Now, to be fair, I do think how I've always interpreted this is okay. Original trilogy is very Luke perspective, but
Mm.
thankfully, what I think they've done to kind of not get too kind of too softeny with Vader is okay. Luke forgives Vader. Everyone else, like, no, he should be in force hell, suffering and burning. And Leia's like, oh no, that guy tortured me. I want
Yeah, yeah.
that man. He's not my dad. Bail Organa is my dad. That man
Mhm.
deserves to be burning in force hell with the spears and arrows, right? So it is one of those interesting things that again we taking these legacy characters. I feel like weirdly with Vader, we tried to do a little bit of both, but I do think we kind of sometimes edge a little bit with like we want the hallway scene because we love the hallway scene, and what part of us just wants to see Vader do badass things because it is cool. I'm sorry, I love the hallway scene, which is just like yeah, that's the Darth Vader we all want to see, just marching Imperial soldiers and kicking butt and taking names.
Yeah, I will say, we can debate and quibble how much evil we see Vader do, but we hear a lot about it.
Right.
Like one of the first things we hear about from Obi-Wan in that scene we've spent a lot of time talking about is, Vader betrayed and murdered your father. He helped the Empire hunt down and
Right.
destroy the Jedi Knights. Like this is a really, he is an evil character.
Mhm.
And y- you know, I think it's important to show that. I think it's
Mhm.
important to show, yeah, the hallway scene is gonna just like, it's just cool. But I think it's important to show him, kill the younglings. I do think like that is important to show like this is how truly evil this guy is, and
Mhm.
we get lots of examples in Obi-Wan and the comics and the books of how
Mhm.
evil he is and how cruel he can be.
Right.
And I think it's important to show that because the story of Anakin is that no one is irredeemable,
Right.
is that no matter how bad
Mhm.
you go, there is still time to come back. Yoda says, once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. But he's wrong. That's the thing. He's wrong. He
Right.
says that, and we all kind of understand what he means. That you know, eh, doing bad things likely leads to more bad things, and in a way, it dominates Vader's destiny because he has to die
Mhm.
to be redeemed. But it doesn't mean that he's irredeemable.
Right.
And so, for Anakin to be redeemed, he we for that redemption to mean something, we have to know that he did evil things, and we have to and I think seeing that it makes it more visceral, and it makes the redemption more powerful. And it's a spiritual journey that Anakin is on, and that's why, coming back as the Force Ghost, I do think he's earned the happy Force Ghost. Now, redemption on a spiritual level and forgiveness from other people is two very, very different things. And I
Right.
think you're absolutely right to call out the fact that the characters in the story, we only know for sure from the movies that
Mhm.
Luke got to that point with Anakin where he could forgive him and still love him. Everybody else, well, we've seen in books and comics that they aren't quite there yet, and may never get there, and that is their prerogative. That is their right. And if I may get on my soapbox about the hunt for Ben Solo for a moment,
Yeah.
the one of the big flaws or one of the big missed opportunities of Rise of Skywalker is killing off Ben Solo, because
Mhm.
then it's a repeat of
Right. Obviously.
Vader's story. If you allow him to be redeemed and you allow his story to continue, then you get to ask these questions that we're asking about Vader, which is, okay, Rey, she forgives him. She
Mhm.
gives him the kiss, and then who knows what that means? Because there's a question of artistic intent. What does
Right.
JJ Abrams think? What does Lucasfilm think? What does Ray Carson think? Well, a whole bunch of people think about what that kiss is. Is it a
It
kiss
was
of
a friendly
gratitude?
kiss of
Is it
gratitude.
friendly? Is it
Yeah.
love? Like whatever it is. Okay, but Ray has forgiven him. She has helped him towards redemption.
Mhm.
Excellent, great. Um, does Poe feel that way? I mean, Poe got tortured by him. Does Finn feel that way? Does everybody else in the galaxy feel that way?
Hang
And
him.
and stories set
Yeah.
after that with an alive Ben Solo allow
Mhm.
you to explore what that means. Are people capable? What does he have to do to earn that from other people? And are there going to be people he just never can earn it from because he caused too much pain? And how does he live with that? These are really, really interesting character questions.
Does he go to
And
prison like Marcion Rowe, but get visitor rights from Ray? He's probably the only
all
person
right.
who would visit him.
Right. Is that part is like what is that? And I have to imagine and maybe this is me projecting, but I have to imagine that that's what Adam Driver and Steven Soderbergh and Scott Burns and everybody who worked on that script was thinking about and was interested in asking, because I can't think of another story to do with that character. To me, that's the only story to do with that character now. And it's kind of the only story ever to do. Now, those are all smart, creative people, and maybe they came up with something way better, and I leave that possibility I leave the door wide open to that possibility. But, there was such an opportunity here to explore a different version of redemption, to explore what does it mean to get forgiveness, and not just center the villain, not just center the or not the villain, the redeemed person, to put other people in the spotlight. And there was real potential there, and they chose not to do it because they just wanted to repeat what had been done before.
I mean, that's why what I love about the Anakin Force Ghost thing, because I feel like, you know, at least this is my interpretation. This is my interpretation of the artistic intent. Is it's Anakin having to kind of earn Ahsoka's forgiveness in some way and teach her a lesson as well. And hopefully more of that. 'Cause, Anakin's dead, but this Force Ghost isn't. So it's sort of like I like the fact that it's not just oh master, yay, you're back. It's kind of like yeah, you did some stuff, Anakin, and I'm not happy about it. And Anakin's still a little. I've always said this, and I've always said why I love Anakin and Ahsoka is like Anakin's still a dick, but he's a dick on the light side now, and it's like he's not just like I have atoned for my sin. He's still kind of a little like, oh yeah, the Vader thing, right?
I it's kind of funny. It's like he's embarrassed by it. Like
Do we have to
I
talk about it?
yeah, he's like he's always like it kills me in towards the end of that episode where he's like, so that's what this is about when she brings up the Vader thing. And I always just want to grab him and go, of course that's what this is about. What the bleep else could this be about? It's always going to be about this. Sorry, Anakin, that is your legacy is very
Mixed at
it's
best.
it's complicated, it's layered. You did the right thing in the end, but uh people still have questions about it. People are always going to have questions about it. And that, that kind of moment between Ahsoka and Anakin in that episode is probably as close to what we're talking about with Ben Solo as we've gotten. I hope it's not as close as we ever get, but it's
Yeah.
it's certainly the closest we've gotten so far.
And I love it because I think this is, and we'll make this my final point. I think even redeemed characters should still be very flawed. I always feel like we want to make, and I always feel like fans want to make post redeemed Anakin to be like, he is enlightened now. He understands. It's like, no, I like this more where he's kind of still doesn't, he gets it, but he still kind of doesn't quite get it. And it's like,
Yeah.
can't even Ahsoka kind of needs to beat the sense into him a little
Well,
bit, just as much as he does it to her.
it's almost like he still has a journey to go on in a way.
Yeah.
Like his main journey is complete, but there's still part of it that whether he has to atone to people or just has to come to terms with it himself. Yes, he did the right thing. He rejected his evil ways. He saved his son and sacrificed himself, and that redeemed his soul. But maybe he's still personally is haunted by it. There was that concept art for episode 7 that never got used of like
Mhm.
Anakin shifting between the Force Ghost of Anakin shifting between Hayden and Vader, and you get a little kind of version of that in Ahsoka, but like maybe that's part of it too, because even in death he still has to um grapple with the repercussions of what he did.
Yeah, and yeah, I agree. Well, as we're talking about Vader, I think we have to sign that we probably need to wrap up with this artistic intent. So just kind of, I'll give final last thoughts. As you know, we do this podcast called Eye on Canon. So in some ways, I'm not saying watch a Star. There's no wrong way to watch a Star Wars. Or at least I don't think there is. Maybe there isn't. It's just I just haven't found it yet.
The wrong way is with your eyes closed and your back turned to the screen and earplugs in.
Exactly. There we go. But there's no wrong way. If you want to watch, Star Wars in the context of just its own individual piece of art, that is fine. Just as much as you want to watch Star Wars as part 4 of a 30 movie sagas and books and comics, right? Much as how I will always watch Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker because those are the two I always find the most interesting in terms of like, what the heck were you thinking, JJ, when you brought back Palpatine in terms of like, what are the mechanics here? I'll also be like, well, the book says it's clones and Dark Empire, so I'll just go with that. There we go. But again, it's all about your interpretation. It's interesting hearing the artist's interpretation. I love hearing the artist's interpretation of like, what were you thinking, Chris Terrio or Rian Johnson, about this, that, this. But as you said, Dominic, it's a big, messy, beautiful collage as much as it is just a little bit of a interesting as you look deeper into it. And I think that's how we should always enjoy Star Wars.
Mm. Yeah, I think just to sum it up, like I think artistic intent for me it matters with each individual story. I think trying to find it across the board is a lot harder, but in terms of like what does Charles Soule, what does Claudia Gray, what does
Mhm.
Dave Filoni, what does Rian Johnson, what does Leslie Headland, what did these people what are they trying to do with their stories? I think that's where it's most interesting. And then yeah, once we've talked about that, then that's when you take the step back. And as I said before, it's a mosaic.
Mhm.
The
Right.
pieces together make a picture
Mhm.
when you step back and look at it. But when you look closely, it doesn't quite line up the way you might expect it to. And that's just part of the fun. Part of the fun is putting together the mosaic is appreciating the mosaic, but then also taking a closer look at each individual piece and going, wow, there's something special about this. And I know that now we're kind of stretching the mosaic metaphor to break
No,
points
I
because
love
you don't usually look at each individual tile of the mosaic and go, wow, what a tile. But in this case, we do.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. All right. And with that, I think that'll be it. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Let us know what you thought about our conversation tonight. Comments below. Let us know. Of course, click those subscribe buttons. We always love it. Also, please do give this channel a like, share, and subscribe. Dominic, thank you so much for joining me. Where can they find you on the internet?
This was a lot of fun, Joel. Thank you for including me in this conversation. It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad we were able to have it. People can hear my thoughts on the Star Wars Underworld podcast live Thursday nights, 9 p.m. on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel, which is where we are right now. Also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your shows pretty much immediately thereafter, maybe give or take an hour or two. And you can also read my thoughts. I do a lot of writing about Star Wars and other things on my Substack. It's called Hoth Off the Press, and you can find it by going to dominicgjones.substack.com. Again, dominicgjones.substack.com. The G stands for Grogu.
Yeah, Grogu. And also, no Melvoni. Grogu does not smell. He is not stinky. He ain't stinky.
He smells. Grogu smells great.
Yes. But yes, you can find me. I didn't put my thing up. Is at JID 20123. I forget. So many numbers. I'm on Blue Sky. Just JID. Find it there. You see my face. Also, you can follow us on the Ion Canon Blue Sky, ioncanon.biscuit.social at the SWU. Also follow the SW Blue Sky. I always post fun stuff, lots of questions. This week I asked, what Star Wars episode of Star Wars TV that's not the Siege of Mandalore do you want to watch in theaters? So,
The Eye of Aldani.
oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I could see that. That's a good one. Yep.
I've also seen all 6 episodes of Kenobi in theaters, just saying.
That's true. That's awesome. And obviously, so check us out next week, guys, where we're doing a Darth Maul canon look back. Speaking of old Maul, we're gonna look him through his whole history from 1999 when we saw that beautiful Maul packaging to today, where he's about to be in Maul Shadow Lord. So be on the lookout for that. Again, thank you, Dominic, so much for joining us. And until then, let's blow this thing and head home.